Let's make sure we're all on the same page. We're in the book of Genesis, a word that means beginnings. And it's not just the story of the beginning of all that is, seen and unseen. It's also the story of the beginning of the people of Israel. It begins with a fellow named Abram, whom God calls, saying, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Now that may not seem like all that big of a deal, except when you continue reading that story of the call of Abraham, and we are told that Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Going with Abram was his wife Sarai, and while we are not given her age, we can be well assured that she was not a much younger trophy wife. God is calling two old people to leave the land of their presumed retirement, travel to a land that God will get around to showing them in God's good time, and oh, by the way, they will be the beginning of a great nation, which means that they will become parents. That's all in the 12th chapter of Genesis. Abram and Sarai have many great adventures, including a name change from Abram to Abraham, which means the ancestor of a multitude of nations, and from Sarai to Sarah, which means princess. That takes up chapters 13 through 20. By the time you get to chapter 21, Abraham is 100 years old when he starts passing out cigars at the birth of his son. So if we're going with the Bible's chronology, around 25 years have passed since God first called Abraham from Ur of the Chaldees until Abram realized his need for a diaper service. There is a motif in the scriptures which appears over and over in both the Old and the New Testaments. The motif is centered on infertility and the lack of an heir. Not only did Abraham and Sarah experience infertility, but so did Abimelech and his wife. Isaac and Rebekah suffered through infertility for 20 years. Manoah's wife was barren until she gave birth to a son whose head was never to be shaved and who would be dedicated to the Lord. His name was Samson. Hannah and Elkanah went for years without a child, but finally one was born. His name was Samuel, the last and greatest of the judges of Israel. He was followed in that family by 3 brothers and 2 sisters. Michal was the daughter of King Saul and the first wife of King David, but never had a child. Elizabeth and Zechariah were past childbearing years, yet to them a child was born who became John the Baptist. In our world and in our time, 1 in 8 couples suffers from some form of infertility. That means most of us know people who face such issues, and some of us know firsthand how devastating such a diagnosis can be. It is one of the most trying and stress-producing situations couples can face. Marriages have dissolved because of it. Dreams are dashed. Hopes are erased. Expectations evaporate. 3 strangers show up at the tent of Abraham and Sarah. The rules of hospitality required Abraham to bring some water for the visitors to wash their feet, and to bring a little bread to nourish themselves. That would be the minimum expectation. But Abraham takes it a step further. He goes to the tent where Sarah is and instructs her to start making cakes or small loaves of bread. He runs to the herd, takes a calf, and hands it over to the attendant to be slaughtered and prepared. He retrieves milk and cheese and then places this feast before his guests. He then withdraws to a nearby tree where he waits and watches his guests. In this first part of the story, Abraham is the central character. It's Abraham who greets, welcomes, and orchestrates the hospitality and the meal that is presented to the visitors. Abraham is the busy little bee in all of this. But then the story shifts. And now the story is about Sarah. Where is Sarah? They asked. She's been out of sight. One of the strangers then says the most amazing thing. I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah will have a son. Now let's say you were pushing 90, pushing it kind of hard, and someone you don't know stops by your house, eats a meal that you prepared, and then for dessert says to you, oh, and by the way, you're going to have a baby. What would you do? Sarah laughed. She giggled. She disbelieved. And then suddenly, the story changes just a little bit. No longer is it as the three strangers who showed up. Now the story tells us the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time, I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son. Now, it's one thing to get caught in a fib, but to get caught by God in a fib is a little much. Sarah, like any of us, denied that she had laughed. She practices the age-old art of plausible deniability. But she didn't. She did it. But she wasn't admitting to a thing. Jump to the end of the story. In Genesis 21, we read, the Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham gave the name Isaac, Yitzhak, to his son whom Sarah bore him. When Abraham's name was changed to Abraham, God told him that he and Sarah would become the parents of a great nation. The Bible tells us that at that moment, Abraham laughed until he fell on his face. Frederick Buechner writes, Sarah stood cackling behind the tent door so the angel wouldn't think she was being rude as tears streamed down her cheeks. So when the time came to name the baby, they named him Isaac, which means laughter, nicknamed Giggles. I am more than sure that Isaac brought more laughter to Abraham and Sarah than they thought they would ever receive. Again, Buechner writes, Sarah and her husband had plenty of hard knocks in their time. And there were plenty more of them to come. But at that moment, when the angel told them they'd better start dipping into their old age pensions for cash to build a nursery, the reason they laughed was that it suddenly dawned on them that the wildest dreams that had ever dreamed had not been half wild enough. And why is that? We all go through tough times, trying times, even terrible times. We all face our fair and unshare fare of hard knocks. We all know heartaches and disappointments. We all know the reality of dreams dashed and hopes dissolved. We all know those moments when nothing seems to go the way we wanted it to go. We all know those moments when impossibility seemed the only possibility. At such a time, and in such moments, the Lord's question to Abraham is still fresh. Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? Another translation gives it to us. Is anything too difficult for the Lord? When the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, to tell her that she would be the mother of God's own Son, she was more than confused and bewildered. We are not told that she laughed, but she certainly had grounds to. But then the angel says to Mary, "For nothing will be impossible with God." Now, I would not presume to stand before you and tell you that God will work out all your problems and trials and challenges. I'm not here to tell you that if you pray hard enough or work hard enough or give generously enough that everything will work out. I'm not even here to tell you that everything happens for a reason, which is a horrible, horrible lie. But I am here to tell you that God is with you and with me and with everyone. I am here to tell you that God knows the pains and the frustrations and the vexations of our lives. I am here to tell you that God is not distant and removed from us, and that God is not unmoved by our situations and conditions and even our tears. I am here to tell you that sometimes, in ways we could never anticipate or foresee, God's presence with us makes that presence perfectly clear. We may think, we may even believe that we need things to be in a particular way, in a particular time, in a particular place. But God meets our need in a way we seldom see, could never have envisioned, could never have even dreamed was possible. Our God is not the God of dead ends. Our God is not a God who can be defeated by life's challenges. Our God is not a God who gives up in the face of adversity. Our God always makes a way. Always. Whether through a sea, or by the birth of a child, or by closing the mouths of lions, or by standing with the unjustly accused in the flames of a fiery furnace, or by calming an angry sea, or by kicking down the door of a tomb and bringing forth life. Our God always, always makes a way, which means we should never say never. I'll never be able to do that. Never say never. I'll never become that. Never say never. I'll never know what that is like. Never say never. That will never be mine. Never say never. Never say never. Why? Because nothing is too difficult for the Lord. Because nothing will be impossible with God. It may not be what we expected. It may not be what we desired. But nothing will be impossible with God. Never say never. Not now, and not forevermore. Amen.